Racial discrimination and oppression after the Mexican-American War. In this lecture, we're going to be taking a look at the relations between Mexican-Americans in California and Texas with Anglo-Americans as they start to populate the region after the Mexican-American War. For Californios, you're going to see a dramatic change, especially for the elite Californios who owned large ranchos in the state. At the end of the Mexican-American War, there was a treaty that was signed called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and in this treaty, the Mexican-Americans were given the option of U.S. citizenship, and their land rights and property rights were to be respected. And the U.S. signed this treaty. But in many ways, the property rights of Californios were not respected. In 1851, the state of California passed a law known as the California Land Act, which required all Californios and Mexican Americans to prove that they had title to their land. They needed to prove in court that they had legal title to their land. And this pretty much encouraged Anglo-Americans to squat on the land of Mexican Americans, because at that point, if you're a Californio and you haven't gone to court to prove that you have legal title to your land, or if you're in the legal system and it's taking time to process through the system, at that point you don't have legal rights to that land. And so squatters could just come and start setting up shop on your land, building a home and living there, because at that point nobody has rights to that land because you haven't legally proven that you have title to the land in court yet. And so that encouraged the squatters to start taking over Mexican-American land. And the whole court process was very difficult for Mexican-Americans at this time. Part of the reason that it was such a problem is because the cost involved, especially if you lived far away from where the courts were located, which were mostly in San Francisco. So if from Southern California, you have to pay expenses to travel up to San Francisco to go to the court. You have to pay lawyer fees, court fees, and all that could be very taxing. Another issue is that the courts themselves could be corrupt. The judges could be paid off or bribed. Politics were influenced by the increasing numbers of Anglo-Americans who were moving into California, and many of them squatting on Mexican-American land. And also, the legal cases were held in English, not Spanish, which was also a great disadvantage to Mexican-Americans who couldn't speak English at that time. They would have to depend on their lawyers to represent them. And of course, the legal fees really hurt them financially. Overall, because of the California Land Act, a lot of Californios ended up losing their land because of court fees and lawyer fees. They ended up having to sell their land in order to pay for these fees, even if they won the court case, right? Many did win the court cases, some did not. But even if you won, after going through that whole experience, you're in debt now, and you have to sell off your land in order to pay for your fees, so you end up losing your land one way or the other. Another way that Californios lost land during this time period was through interracial marriages. How did that work? Well, basically you would have Anglo-Americans marrying the daughters of elite Californios who owned large ranches, and eventually through inheritance they would gain the rights to that land, especially because in American culture at that time, once a woman is married to a man, the man gains complete right over all of property that the couple owns. The woman loses her legal identity and the man represents the couple. So once Anglo-American men married into these California families, they gained the rights to that land and property. It was much quicker in some cases than going through the whole legal process of stripping the Californios of their land. And lastly, another way that the Californios lost their land early on in California statehood was through natural disasters. In the 1860s, there was 2 years of drought, not a lot of rainfall, and during that time, a lot of the cattle that was owned by the large ranchos died off. You couple that with the rising prices of cattle, and a lot of the ranchos simply went out of business. They had to mortgage their properties and eventually had to sell their properties. And so through all of these events, you see the Californios losing a lot of the land that they once owned in the state of California.